Welcome to Section 420, Talkin Yankees. Or should I say, top of the morning. My next guest is John Fitzgerald. He's the founder of the Baseball United Foundation, which sends baseball equipment to parts all around the globe, as well as a member of the Irish American Baseball Society, which looks at the history of baseball in Ireland, as well as here in the United States. So let's bring him on. Hey, John, welcome to the show.
Thanks, James.
Now, again, you're part of the Irish Baseball Society. People can follow you on Instagram at Irish Baseball Society, and of course your website, irishbaseballsociety.org. So again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Now, obviously, you put this together. It's kind of something I just found interesting. Just going back, history of baseball, not only of Irish people coming to America in the late 1800s and early 1900s, but also physically baseball in Ireland, which I guess was started back as far as 1874. So just tell us that story. How did actually baseball, kind of an American game, make its way back to Ireland when a lot of immigrants were actually coming to America?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the way it started for us was we've been working in Ireland for about 15 years to support baseball over there. And at the time, we weren't aware of the history of it, but baseball there have been attempts to bring baseball to Ireland since, as you said, 1874. That's the earliest we know. But we're finding a lot of evidence of it being introduced to different parts of the country in the late 1800s, early 1900s. There was a really strong youth program in the 1950s and 60s. So it's kind of interesting because in America, the Irish immigrants and the first and second generation Irish Americans were playing baseball, and everybody knew about that. But at the same time, there were many attempts to bring baseball to Ireland with varying degrees of success. Sometimes it didn't work out. Sometimes it did. The problem that they always ran into was whether it was a youth team or an adult team, at a certain point, they would run out of people to coach, to umpire. They just didn't have they didn't have fields at all. So as you can imagine, it's really hard to keep something like that going for more than 5 or 6 or 7 years unless you have that kind of support.
Gotcha. And in terms of just some names again of some Irish accomplishments. You had Connie Mack, of course, going back to baseball, all-time wins as a manager. John McGraw, all-time wins in the National League, and of course, I found interesting a picture of Pud Gavin, 1876 here. First pitcher to throw a perfect game, and of course, 12 years later, becomes the first pitcher to achieve 300 wins.
Yeah. So there's a lot of guys like that throughout history. I think Pud Galvin also threw that perfect game on the same day that he threw a no-hitter. So he actually threw 2 complete game no-hitters in the same day. A lot of guys like that. Patsy Doherty, who had, I think, a 70-year baseball career. A lot of baseball lifers, guys that played, were all-stars or just really good ball players, and then ended up managing, ended up coaching, went to the college level or stayed in the pros. And then on the other side of it, we've also got a really active research committee that has done a lot of genealogy research and has kind of gone back and traced the lineage of players from today and recent past. One of the ones we recently found was George Brett. And around St. Patrick's Day this year, we actually found Jake DeGrom and Derek Jeter. There's been a lot of rumors that Jeter had some Irish ancestry. So we went back and we found it. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I think it went back to the 1870s. So our head genealogist, a guy by the name of Tim Carr, he went back and found out, the name of Jeter's his great grandparents, where they were born and that sort of thing. And it's just, it's an interesting topic because of all the different connections between the history of baseball in Ireland and the history of the Irish Americans, playing baseball in the early days. But then you see it kind of continues, straight through. I think we're working on, I think Mike Trout is one of the guys we're looking into right now. And I mean, but it's just a really interesting topic because of the rich history of how the game has kind of intersected with Ireland over the years.
Gotcha. And, so the Irish Baseball Society, when did it actually get started officially?
So we started in late 2017. And prior to that, for about, at the time, I think it was 13 or 14 years, excuse me, we had been working in Ireland under the name of the Baseball United Foundation, and that's a nonprofit that I started. We started with the intention of helping support baseball in Ireland, youth baseball, amateur baseball. And over the years, we've started working with other countries. So what we did in 2017 was we broke off a lot of the Irish activities that we do into the Irish American Baseball Society to really give people who have donated or supported what we do over the years a place to kind of, share their experience as both a baseball fan and an Irish American. You don't have to be Irish to be in the Irish American Baseball Society, but if you have an interest in the country of Ireland or the history of Ireland, it certainly helps. But we do have a lot of baseball fans who are not Irish, not too interested in Ireland, but they're intrigued by the history of it. But they're really, they're baseball fans. So we really we're open to everybody, and it's something that if you're interested in Ireland at all and you're a real baseball fan of any era, really, we've got a lot of cool stuff going on.
Yeah, I'm like 1/3 Irish, so I got a little horse in the game there.
There you go. Yeah, we've got a lot of guys just like you.
And of course, your website, irishbaseballsociety.org. They could check that out, as well as check out the podcast. I think it's hosted by Rich Becker and Jim Ward.
Yeah, irishbaseball.org and Rick Becker and Jim Ward host the podcast. Rick's down in Florida, and Jim is up in Maine. It's interesting because we launched launched a couple of years ago, and we've been kind of gathering momentum, growing, and we got the podcast going. Rick and Jim have never actually met each other. A lot of our members still have not met each other. We're kind of waiting for things to open up a bit so we can have more events, indoor and outdoor. We've got these things going on already. We've got a history committee with guys in Ireland, San Francisco, Michigan. I mean, just all across the country. So we're really we're still growing, and we're looking for new members. But we're really anxious to get out there and see some ball games together and have some events.
Okay. And now you mentioned before the Baseball United Foundation. I also saw that you guys were also trying to have a drive to get equipment and stuff to not only Ireland, but places of the globe that just don't really have access to, bats, balls, and gloves and things of that nature.
Yeah, that's so the Baseball United Foundation was started, as I said, to help baseball in Ireland. And over the years, we'd have a situation where we'd get, a couple of 100 pounds of donated baseball equipment, and there'd be no place to send it because, Ireland has baseball, but it's not throughout the country. So you can't just send 500 pounds of baseball gloves and bats every year. That they don't have the room for it. They don't have enough people playing baseball. So we would start to ship to other countries. We shipped to Nigeria, we shipped to Kenya, a few other places. And we started shipping throughout the US as well. And what we found was there's such a need for support. It's equipment, small donations, that sort of thing. Like if you donated $20 to a baseball team in Belize, that dollar goes a lot further than if you donated it somewhere else. And that's kind of the message that we have. If you have an old glove, or if you have, $10 or $20 lying around, we can use that to help get some gloves to these places, or even coaching. Obviously with COVID now, there's a lot more need for funding because, everything, with social distancing and things that, cleaning equipment, things that have, never been thought of in a youth baseball context. Depending on the government, depending on the country, it can become really restrictive as far as what they're able to do. So what we're really trying to do is just kind of find these organizations throughout the world, like in Bhutan, Belize, Colombia. We're working now with Sri Lanka, and I think Nigeria just added to the program. So we're just trying to help them. We're raising funds online. We're trying to get the message out of who these kids are, who the coaches are, what the teams are doing, because it's all different levels. I mean, there's certain areas of the world where baseball's kind of developed, and these kids, can watch baseball and understand the game, or maybe they have a little bit more equipment than someplace else. And then there's other places where the kids are playing sometimes without shoes. So, you can't fix all those problems. But what you can do is work with the organization, work with the coaches and the parents, and try to figure out, how can we make an impact? How can we help you guys at least, get more kids playing and help the kids that are playing have more fun?
Yeah, and I think it also would help the game itself to discover perhaps new players. Like with the Yankees, Mariano Rivera, when he was down in Panama, I think he'd use like a cardboard box with string as a glove, and
Yeah,
from that came the greatest closer probably of all time. So what if he had like good equipment? What if other parts of the world had really good equipment? Might discover the next superstar just because now they have the equipment and the drive, and the best might come out of them.
exactly. We've seen actually, we've been doing these Zoom videos with a team in Belize, and they've got some ball players that have seen some apparently Cubs games are seen in Belize, so they're all Cubs fans, and they've got some kids that can really throw, but they've had minimal experience in baseball, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids, but it's the same as Rivera. If he didn't have access to a real glove or real coaching at some point in his development, he probably would have played another sport. He probably would have played soccer, I would imagine. And it's the same thing with these kids. It's like you can't. We're not trying to build them a stadium or a really nice little league field. Even we're trying to find them gloves and find them the funding to make sure that their field has cut grass. Little things that we would take for granted, and it really doesn't take much. It's not like we're trying to solicit multi-$1,000 donations from corporations. I mean, if you talk to them about baseball in Bhutan or Belize or Colombia, they wouldn't be interested, and you can understand why. But what we're really trying to do is reach out to baseball fans across the country and say, hey, you know what? If you really want to make an impact, $5, $10, $20 really does go a long way for these kids, and you can really get involved, and we do our best to try to follow up with the teams and make sure that if you're interested in it, even if you don't donate, you're just interested in the story, that we try to follow these kids, and hopefully 5, 6, 7 years from now, we'll start to see some of these kids coming and playing ball in the U.S., whether it be college or pro, or just become coaches in their home country and kind of give back to the game that way.
And for just for people, I guess I saw you had the Facebook page for Baseball United Foundation. Is there anywhere else people can go if they want to donate, or perhaps send equipment, or anything like that nature?
Yeah, if they want to donate or learn more about the program, they can go to sharebaseball.org. And then the website is baseballunitedfoundation.org. And either way, you'll get there, and look us up on Facebook. We're on Instagram or on Twitter. Just find us and kind of just follow along.
Do you have any sort of like this success story or a message someone gave you of just like some big impact that this made in some part of the globe?
Yeah, I mean, our track record over in Ireland has been longer than the other countries. I mean, we've helped raise funds to build fields. We've sent equipment over. We've seen kids. We've brought kids over here to go to baseball camps and stuff, and some of those kids are now playing on the Irish national team. So it's whether it's the kid just found something in baseball that helped in some cases keep them off the streets, or other cases gave them some discipline to achieve their dreams, and which may have nothing to do with baseball. Anyone who's played youth sports or coached youth sports or been involved knows that whether it's baseball or something else, to give a child the opportunity to be a part of a team and to get good coaching and to appreciate that good coaching, that could make them more receptive to anything from teaching in the classroom to leadership and that sort of thing. And we've seen that in Ireland, and then there's the community aspect of building a field or helping a team stay afloat for a few years when it can get tough to keep the team going year to year, but to give them that infrastructure. So it varies, but we've seen success in Ireland with that, and that's kind of what we're trying to do with these other countries, because we know what works. We've done it for years, and we're excited to see baseball become a global game, but we don't want it tied to finding those diamonds in the rough. That doesn't happen unless there's baseball in a community. So that's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely true. And in terms of this, the research you do for the, I guess, Irish players, or whether, in Ireland, or players like, athletes that came here, what resources you use to look into some of these things, like, even like Jeter's genealogy, or just, finding these old baseball records from like the 1800s?
That's a great question. So to start the process, you usually will start with Sabre or Wikipedia, or a combination of both. we'll see a name or we'll hear a rumor that somebody's, Irish, and we'll, or, go back to like the 1800s, we'll find a guy who, has an Irish name, and we figure, well, he probably is. Let's look into it. From there, our genealogist, Tim Carr, will use a number of different resources. I mean, I know he uses things like ancestry.com and things like that, but he's got other resources that, I'm not a genealogist, I don't know specifically, but he's got a lot of sources, and he works them, really hard. He does a lot of hard work on that. And then we've got a team of researchers throughout the country and in Ireland. And what they do, we've got a guy in San Francisco who's one of the preeminent, a guy named David Block. He's one of the preeminent researchers of the existence of baseball before 1900. So he actually discovered baseball being played, I think, in Germany in like the late 1780s or something like that. Fascinating guy, but he doesn't speak Irish, and he's always suspected that baseball was played in Ireland before 1874. So we have a guy in Ireland, Patrick Mahoney, who grew up a Cincinnati Reds fan in Ohio, and then moved out to Ireland, and he speaks Irish. And so those two guys are working together to go through, primary source documents that are written in Irish to try to find evidence that the game was played. And in Ireland, it's interesting. One of the four major Irish, well, it's not major, but one of the four Irish sports is rounders, which is baseball's ancestor. They play it in Ireland now. They've played it for years, going back probably 200 or more years. So like there's the existence of a game that's incredible. It's very close to, I would say, slow pitch softball. But they were playing that in the 1800s. So the idea that baseball was also being played is really not that far fetched. So these guys are working together, going through primary sources. Again, going back to what I said before, these guys have never met. They've only met via Zoom during COVID. So, we've got all these guys, kind of when they can go into the library, looking up stuff online, working together, collaborating basically virtually. And so, these guys are writers, they're researchers, they're world renowned. They've got their ways to do it. I'm just really happy to be able to kind of like check in and say, wow, that's really cool. Because it is. I'm a baseball fan. And that's for me, that's what it's all about. But these guys take it real seriously, and they do a great job. They've found evidence of baseball clubs in Ireland in the early 1880s. So a little bit after the first known game in Ireland, which was 1874. And that was Philadelphia Athletics against the Boston Red Sox. So those were major league teams that went over to play an exhibition as part of a tour of Europe. But then, there's evidence that within 10 years, there were baseball clubs throughout Ireland. What we're trying to do now is figure out exactly how successful they were, what happened to them, and did that continue? The next instance we have of baseball is the early 1900s. And it was seen as kind of a revolutionary way to drive English influence out of certain areas of Ireland. Because the English were playing cricket. And the idea was if the Irish can play baseball, even though it's an American sport, it will lessen the influence of the English sports on Irish culture. And then again, we found baseball, a strong baseball community, a youth baseball team that started in Waterford in the late 1950s. And then by 1965, they were playing in three different sections of two sections of Waterford and then up in Dublin. So they had three teams. They hosted a U.S. Air Force team. I mean, it was a big deal. And then it kind of faded away when the guy who started it all passed away. So just, a lot of really interesting stories. A lot of really hard work has gone into, bringing baseball to Ireland, and it's there today. And, there's a lot of hard work from volunteers and stuff like that. And it goes back, it seems over 100 years. So, we're here for that. We're here for, researching that, learning more about it, celebrating that, and appreciating it. But we're all inclusive. So if you're a baseball fan and you're into that kind of, research about stuff, that's what we do.
And again, earlier mentioned Pud Gavin, but are there any others great Irish players that maybe a typical baseball fan never heard of?
Iron Man McGinnity, who won 246 games in, 246 games in 10 years. He ended up pitching until he was 54. He retired from Major League Baseball and then continued as a minor league pitcher just because he liked doing it. He owned a couple teams. He had some part ownership. but 246 wins in 10 years, regularly threw over 300 innings a year. Led the league in complete games and shutouts. I mean, the guy was just an absolute beast. A lot of guys like that. Willie Keeler, obviously, who I believe is still tied for the National League record for hitting streak with Pete Rose. As you mentioned, John McGraw, Ned Hanlon, who was a Hall of Fame player and manager. Just a lot of guys from the late 1800s. A lot of the top players. Ed Delahanty was another one. And these guys would basically, they would grow up playing baseball in the city that they grew up in, and there were a lot of people who played baseball obviously back then, but baseball was really strong in the Irish communities because it was seen as a way to get out of poverty. And for those guys, it worked. For countless others, it obviously didn't. But it kind of created this culture of Boston and New York are perfect examples. Baltimore as well. There was a baseball culture in the Irish community because there were so many people that tried to play or manage and get out of poverty that created a lot of baseball fans because people wanted to see guys they knew play, and the people that played eventually they would hang up the spikes and they would become fans. Just really interesting stuff. But I would say Pud Galvin's a big one. A guy like Bill Carrigan, who won, he was a catcher for the Red Sox, but he also was a manager, and he won he was the first Red Sox manager to win back-to-back World Series as a manager. He was also responsible partly for signing Babe Ruth. And the legend is that he was Ruth's teammate and kind of kept him on the straight and narrow path when he was young. Ruth was apparently always as wild as he was in later years. But
supposedly,
what's that?
Supposedly, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But this guy apparently, as his manager, as the guy who was partially responsible for convincing ownership to sign him with the Red Sox, they became roommates, and he kind of kept him on the path to getting better and staying out of trouble at least long enough to get him to the Yankees, and the rest is history. Hugh Duffy's another guy who he has the highest average. I think it was he batted like 440. That's the highest single season average in baseball. It was different era. It was the 1890s, but still, it's a record that stands today, will probably never be broken. Big Ed Walsh, who was a pitcher for the White Sox, he currently or still holds the all-time record for lifetime ERA. I think it's at 1.82. So he was a spitballer. So again, totally different thing, but the guy, I think he led the league in wins and saves. It was a different time. I think he led the league in saves with 6, but he also led the league in wins, with 29. So different game, but still, these are guys that really cool stories about these guys too, as well. Like Walsh, after, all-star career, Hall of Fame career, just randomly, that's if you read his bio, he just somehow saved 2 drowning kids in Lake Michigan in 1915. It's, just crazy stuff that most people, that would be the lead of the story. With Ed Walsh, it's somewhere down near the bottom. So, but yeah, there's just so many guys that One Arm Daly, who I just called up. This was one that I had never heard of. The guy, he lost his left hand at the age of 13, made his major league debut at the age of 34, won 23 games in 1883, won 27 games in 1884, threw a no-hitter, struck out 19 in a game, which stood for, that was a record that stood for over 100 years. Struck out 483 batters one year. One time got into a fight with his catcher, punched him on the mound. And lifetime had 163 starts, 157 complete games. Was one of the most hated players apparently in baseball back then. His teammates hated him, the other team hated him. He would fight with umpires, he'd fight with his own team. Never played more than one season on one team. Eventually, they were just fed up with him. Won a lot of games, but was just such a tough guy to get along with that his career didn't last very long. I think he was in baseball for 8 or 9 years. He had some issues, but he could pitch apparently. And most people have never heard of this guy. So that's one of the things we try to do is really, find these guys and say, hey, look, George Brett, his grandparents are from Ireland. That's pretty cool. Take a look at you, one-armed Daly. I bet you never heard of this guy. I mean, he had one hand, and he was before Jim Abbott. 100 years before Jim Abbott, this guy was winning games, and most people have never heard of the guy. So it's actually one of the few players we found that there's no record of his death. He just kind of disappeared, which is kind of crazy that, like, they know he was in I think Baltimore in the 1920s, and that was it. Nobody saw him again. Nobody knows where he's buried. Nobody knows anything about him. No family. Some sad stuff like that too. But that's, again, like this Irish baseball thing. It's like this like phenomena that, like, there's characters. There's some, crazy people. There's some really, really good people too. We try to research it all and give a complete picture of exactly who these guys were, and broadcasters too, media guys. Tom Verducci. We recently found his ancestry, but it's kind of, we still think it's an outgrowth of what happened in the 1800s, early 1900s. This Irish baseball culture is obviously totally different now. There's so many other sports and things for people to do. But there's still a strong, Irish, presence in the game.
Today with Ireland, are they still trying to get like a World Baseball Classic team together? I mean, is there any closer to that, or is that still kind of a challenge?
It's still a challenge. I think that, we'd like to see it. There's certain, they're going to have to get to a certain level of success in Europe. I think that the players are out there. There's a lot of Irish American citizens, dual citizens of Ireland and America that can make Ireland a really, really good team. So we're hoping that they get a shot to play for Ireland, and we get a shot to see Ireland in the WBC. That's one of the things we're really hoping to see happen in the very near term.
All right. Well, John, I appreciate joining us again. People can follow you on Instagram at Irish Baseball Society. Of course, check out the website, irishbaseballsociety.org. And again, a lot of Yankee fans might be interested. Shane Spencer, former Yankee, and former world champion with the Yankees, was one of the guests. She has a great story. So check it out. And of course, check out the good work you do with the Baseball United Foundation. So again, John, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, James. I really appreciate it.